On the salt-soaked cliffs of Charleston, shrouded in mist, Kanu stood motionless, letting the sea wind slap his face like a constant reminder of the emptiness he'd carried his whole life. Deep in his chest, the question of his birth mother still stirred, a wound that refused to heal. And that absence was so vast that sometimes he felt he was only half of himself. Then the pitch-black ocean suddenly blazed, golden light surging upward as if the souls of ancestors were rising from the abyss. The water parted gently, revealing the form of a golden-scaled mermaid, her eyes brimming with a sorrow he couldn't comprehend. Behind her, a young man stepped out of the waves, bearing a face identical to his own. If the world laid before him two bloodlines pulling in opposite directions, would his heart be strong enough to choose the right one? The wind lashed the ocean's face like ancient drums, relentless and heavy, carrying the long sigh of ancestors. That night, on the Charleston shore, the sky hung black as a funeral cloth that nature had draped over the Gullah land, where sea spirits still whispered quietly to anyone willing to listen. The gale screamed as if trying to rip the night apart, while towering waves rose like walls from another world, threatening to spill into this one. Amid the roar, Kanu stood alone at the edge, fingers clenched around the old golden scale, a strange piece of metal that Miss Alma Rivers had pressed into his child hand long ago, a charm whose true power even she never fully understood. Flickering lights from the wooden houses along the shore bled into the darkness, and Kanu's silhouette stood solitary, a small marker defying the fury of the storm. He no longer shouted. The desperate cry he had hurled at the sea moments earlier had been swallowed whole by the waves. All that remained was ragged breathing and the feeling that his body was dissolving into the night. Yet deep in his chest, the ache refused to quiet, the ache of someone who had long felt incomplete. His life seemed like a song left unfinished, missing its chorus, missing the harmony that had never come home. The night storm raged on, but Kanu did not run, did not step back, as though part of his soul belonged to this tempest. Since childhood, he had heard the stories. Ancestors stolen by the sea, ancestors returned by the sea, ancestors who left their pain echoing in the memory of the people. The elders spoke of golden beings beneath the water, half human, half ocean creatures who could calm or enrage the sea with a single glance. They had always been legend, until tonight. A bolt of lightning tore the sky open, white as a burial shroud. In that flash, Kanu saw something moving far below the surface, a faint glow, like an oil lamp hidden in fog. He rubbed his eyes, certain it was only storm madness. But the light did not vanish. It grew, flickering like fire burning at the heart of the ocean. Then the sea began to open. Not with a crash or a collapse, but with absolute silence. That silence made even the storm pause. The wind held its breath. For a few brief seconds there was no surf, no thunder, only a sacred hush, as sacred as an ancient rite about to reveal itself. Golden light welled up from the depths like a fountain of souls awakened. It turned the water amber, spilled across the waves, washed over the sand, over Kanu's face, over the golden scale clenched in his fist. The glow made his heart skip a beat, as though it were calling his name from inside the veins of the sea. From the center of that radiance, a figure slowly rose, not stepping out of the water, but cradled by it, gentle and majestic. A woman, upper body human and breathtakingly beautiful, lower body a long tail covered in scales that shone like 1,000 shards of sun. Every movement scattered light and gathered it again, a dance of spirit. Mama Nuru. A name that had lived for centuries only in Gullah stories and songs now stood alive, as real as earth and sky. She did not speak. Her eyes spoke instead. Eyes filled with sorrow and regret. Eyes that reached the darkest corners of Kanu's heart. In her gaze, he saw his own loneliness reflected. saw every long night he had ached for an explanation, saw the question of his origins that he had never dared voice. Then the sea behind her blazed again. This time the light was not soft, but sharp, fierce, a blade slicing the dark. A second figure stepped forward, hair dripping, skin the deep green black of deep water, shoulders draped in armor forged from whale scales, eyes like bottomless wells, and the face exactly like his own. Kanu staggered half a step back, his heart splitting in two. The greatest storm of the night was no longer out on the water. It was inside his chest. When their eyes met, one belonging to land, one to ocean, the air itself seemed to stretch until it could hardly breathe. Who truly stood before him? And what would happen when that other self answered for the destiny that was meant to be his? Was this the moment of reunion? Or the beginning of a separation deeper than the black night sea? And before we continue with the main story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Oh, and please drop a comment below letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know. The morning after the storm, Charleston did not fully wake. It only half opened its eyes, like a survivor still trembling in the chill of what it had endured. Salt mist drifted over the stilted wooden houses, leaving a thin silver sheen like the ashes of a sacred fire that had just gone out. The Gullah people stepped outside without a word, without a smile, quietly gathering whatever the sea had left behind: torn fishing nets, driftwood, and the empty spaces where furniture had been swept away. In that hush stood Kanu, balanced on the top step of Miss Alma River's porch. He stared out at the shimmering salt marsh in front of him, the ground still holding the footprints of last night's storm. Everything around him seemed altered in just a few hours. The sky had gone pale, the wind now only a sigh, and the smell of the ocean stronger than ever, as though the sea were still whispering secrets he hadn't yet learned. In his mind lingered the image of the sea warrior, a face so identical to his own, it shook even the memories he thought had turned to stone. And behind that image floated Mama Nuru's face, her eyes carrying every sorrow the deep ocean had ever known. He tried to push them away, but his heart had never beaten this heavily. The golden scale in his hand grew warm, like a small hidden flame under his skin, waking something he wasn't ready to name. Charleston that morning held the fragile beauty of an unfinished painting, sky split in two, one half faint blue, the other charcoal gray. Tree branches still bowed from the night wind. Rows of moss-covered wooden houses touched gold by the first weak sunlight. Yet amid everything familiar, Kanu felt like a stranger, as if he belonged fully neither to this land nor to the deep sea. The Gullah had always believed the ground they lived on was where the boundary between two worlds was thin as morning mist. One side the mainland, where people could plant, breathe, cry, laugh. The other side the ocean, where ancestors still whispered and lost souls searched for the way home. Their old songs reminded them that nothing was ever truly lost, only moved to another dwelling place. But Kanu, from childhood on, had felt that part of his own soul had never found a place to settle. Miss Alma rearranged the protective charms hanging by the door, her old fingers trembling slightly in the cool morning breeze. Kanu watched her and suddenly remembered every childhood night when she tapped a small hand drum and spoke of the sea spirits who kept the rhythm of the waves. She used to say the Gullah ancestors carried the memory of the ocean across from Africa, and that the sea still remembered them, still recognized every descendant's face. He had thought they were only stories until last night. His feet carried him along the bay's edge, where the water gleamed under the frail sunlight. Gentle waves spread in circles like the rings of a ritual. The moon had set long ago, yet its shadow seemed to linger on the surface, blending with the pale gold reflected from the scale he held. Each time the light touched his skin, he felt another heartbeat. Not his own, but something deeper, older. Sometimes he thought he heard distant drums, not coming from the village, but from somewhere beneath the sea, where stories were kept in silence. The rhythm was steady, slow, like a summons. In that stillness, childhood memories returned. Himself as a boy sitting on the beach, watching other children run and play, while he listened to the ocean as though it were trying to tell him something. He remembered the look in Miss Amma's eyes when she saw him listening that way. Eyes full of love and worry, as if she had recognized something long ago, but never dared speak it. All his life, Kanu had been raised between two worlds. One world of land, heavy with love, poor yet sheltering. One world of deep water, where faint songs once led him to the edge of dreams. And last night, those two worlds had touched in a blaze of gold. Kanu walked to the water's edge and bent to study his reflection in the calm surface. His shadow stretched, then melted into the dark blue, dissolving into the place where he had once seen the warrior's eyes. Eyes that held both the ocean's fury and the exact same loneliness he carried. He wondered if everything in his life until now had only been preparation for that single moment, the moment he faced someone wearing his own face, yet belonging to a place he had never set foot. Afternoon spilled over the sea islands in a tired gold, the last sunlight left after a long journey. The treetops swayed, shaking off last night's raindrops like sorrows that hadn't yet found their names. Still, Kanu felt the whole land sinking into an invisible emptiness, a strange hush that made every breath feel louder than usual. He sat on the dirt path beside the strands of sea garlic Miss Amma had hung to dry since morning. The smell of garlic, salt, wet wood, everything that had raised him like a parent's breath. But today, those scents brought no peace. In his head lived the eyes of the sea warrior, eyes that held the whole ocean, yet carried the exact same loneliness he knew. That mirror image split him in two. It felt as if two separate hearts were beating out of rhythm inside his chest. Kanu had known he was different since he was small. While other children played at the water's edge, he would stand back and watch the waves, suddenly overcome by a longing for something he had never touched. Every night, no matter how tired or busy, he found himself turning toward the sea, as though the wind carried someone calling his name from far below. The village grown-ups said it was just a child's imagination, but the older he grew, the clearer it became. The memory wasn't his, yet it lived in him like an underground stream. The late light struck the golden scale and set it blazing in his palm. The glow wasn't fierce like the storm's lightning, but it carried a strange weight, the warmth of a familiar hand he had never held. Kanu closed his fist around it, pressing the scale to his chest as if shielding something fragile trembling inside his heart. There were moments he wanted to believe it was nothing more than the luck charm Miss Amma had given him. But every time he touched it, a thin mist settled over his memories, as though he stood before the door of a story whose ending had been torn away. And that scared him. Scared him that this familiar life, the wooden house, the night drums, Miss Amma's songs, might be only half the world he truly belonged to. In the village, everything moved at its old rhythm. Elders walked the lanes slowly, footsteps heavy with memory. Children chased one another across the damp sand, their laughter rising in the wind like ancestor calls. But to Kanu, the whole world seemed covered in a thin haze, every sound distant. He felt himself standing between two pulses of life, one belonging to the land where he was loved, the other to the ocean he had never known, yet quietly yearned for. Dusk slid across the water like an old spirit wandering home. Kanu walked out onto the beach, feet sinking into wet sand. The sea lay calmer after the storm, but the calm unsettled him. It wasn't the gentle peace of a good day. It was the long silence before the real story begins. He remembered Mama Nuru's eyes holding the regret of an entire bloodline. Though she had spoken little, her silence carried 100 forgotten tales. There were seconds when he felt she wanted to come closer, to say something the waves wouldn't allow. Then the storm had swept everything away before he could grasp the truth. Kanu lifted his face to the thin new moon rising, pale gold like the stroke of an old painter's brush. Moonlight slipped down the water, turning into writhing ribbons of light like veins of gold running deep beneath the sea. He wondered if tonight's moon was shining for both places at once, one place for him, one for the man who wore his exact face. In that moment, he realized his greatest pain wasn't fear or confusion. It was the loneliness that had lived in him since the day he first learned to think. A loneliness that didn't belong to a young man raised in a loving Gullah village, but to a soul that hadn't yet found its missing piece. And now he knew that piece existed, breathing, walking up out of the waves, looking back at him with eyes that mirrored the same ache. Kanu tightened his grip on the scale. Its warmth spread through his fingers like fate whispering. Because if that warrior truly was his twin brother, then the biggest question rising from the depths was no longer, who is he? It had become something far heavier. Evening settled over the sea islands like a heavy indigo silk cloth, sliding across every wooden roof before lying perfectly still on the mirror flat sea. That night the air carried an unexplainable weighting, as though the water itself were holding its breath, as though the moon were leaning in to hear a story that had been buried for 18 years. Kanu walked the shoreline with the golden scale in his hand, its faint glow tracing ancient water veins across his chest. The sand beneath his feet was colder than any night before, and the wind carried salt mixed with the old smell of deep-sea kelp, the scent of memory older than any human on the island. Overhead, the moon floated like the round silver drum his ancestors beat during ceremonies to call spirits home. Every wave that kissed the shore answered in the same slow, deep rhythm, like a heart trying to speak through the dark. In that moment, he remembered Mama Nuru's eyes in the storm, golden eyes that could light the whole ocean, yet held every sorrow the deep had ever swallowed. He hadn't understood everything she wanted to tell him, but her presence had opened a door inside his soul, a door to roots he never knew he had lost. Kanu stopped at the jutting rock where, since childhood, he had heard songs no one else could hear. Tonight the song returned, soft as breath, thin as smoke, yet it made his whole body shiver. It was not human song. It was water touching moonlight and turning into melody only souls can understand. He closed his eyes. For a few seconds, everything else drifted away. Waves receded, wind stopped. Only the song remained, and the second heartbeat inside his chest that had never belonged to him alone. Then the water in front of him moved. Not waves, not wind. A transparent film lifted from below. Golden light spread from the depths, not violent like the storm night, but gentle, lullaby soft, the forgotten cradle song of the world. The light parted the sea in two, and she rose again. Mama Nuru surfaced with the tenderness of the first breeze of the season, yet her beauty made time itself pause. Her tail curved beneath the moon, every golden scale scattering 1,000,000 tiny fallen stars across the water. Each movement felt like a blessing the ocean was sending into the night. Kanu opened his eyes, his heart clenched with a feeling too large for words. She looked at him, still sorrowful, but lighter now, as if the warrior's appearance had granted her permission to hope. She did not speak, yet her silence walked straight into his heart, a language heard only by instinct, by blood, by the emptiness he had carried all his life. Then the light from her tail widened into a perfect circle around them. Inside the circle, the water became glass. Outside, waves kept their steady rhythm, as though the ocean had drawn a boundary separating them from the mortal world. From behind her, another motion. The darkness beneath was torn open once more. Deep green-blue light flared. A strong, solid shape approached. When the figure broke the surface, Mama Nuru's golden glow fell across his face. That face. The face identical to Kanu's. Only the eyes were the color of the abyss, carrying the loneliness of a soul kept too long beneath layers of waves. Kanu took one step back, not from fear, but because the truth in front of him was too vast for one heart to hold. Two lives torn apart at birth now stood side by side, inside a wordless rite witnessed by sea and moon. The sea warrior stood beside Mama Nuru, the green-blue sheen of his skin blending with her gold to create a color that had never belonged to land. He looked at Kanu, and in that instant both were silent in exactly the same way, terrifyingly the same, as if they had been speaking to each other their whole lives without ever needing sound. Something shifted in Kanu's chest. Not fear, not anger, recognition. Like finding the piece of himself stolen 18 years ago. Mama Nuru tilted her head, waiting for him to understand what she could not say. And when the moon dropped its final silver ray onto the water, Kanu knew this moment was not a greeting. It was a door leading down into an ocean of secrets, losses, and a bloodline that had never had a name spoken aloud. But what waited beyond that door? And would the heart of a land-born son be strong enough to step into the world that had kept his brother for 18 years? And now, dear viewers, let's pause for just a second. Hit that subscribe button before we dive into the heart of the story, but only if what I've shared truly resonates with you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's always amazing to see all of you joining us from every corner of the globe. Night poured over the sea islands like black ink spilling from an ancient jar, swallowing the last threads of moonlight. The air around the rocky outcrop thickened, as though the entire world were holding its breath for the next heartbeat that would decide the fate of two brothers finally reunited. The sea, once soft as silk beneath Mama Nuru's golden taillight, suddenly stretched tight as rawhide, unnaturally still, so quiet that the faint tremor of spirits beneath the surface could be heard. Kanu stood inside the circle of light, body shaking with the chaos flooding his heart. He felt every beat in his chest, no longer the steady rhythm of a land-born man, but the collision of two worlds inside one ribcage. Before him, the sea warrior Madhu stood like a statue forged from darkness and salt water, deep green light rippling across his shoulders like captured waves frozen in flesh. Madhu didn't need to speak. His very existence was a question that echoed, a question of origin, of loss, of the piece of soul Kanu never knew was missing. Mama Nuru reached out and golden light poured upward across the water like a river running backward. That light didn't just illuminate her skin, it summoned memories that had been sealed away. Memories of a birth night in raging storm, when an ancient curse forced her to watch her two infants torn into separate worlds. The space around the three of them began to tremble. Waves no longer lapped. They breathed long ceremonial breaths. Moonlight sliced down so sharp it cut their shadows in half on the water. And the wind, once only the night's exhale, now carried the raw scent of something primordial, a truth buried too long. Then the impossible happened. The golden scale in Kanu's hand flared hot, as if it had touched invisible sacred fire. He flinched but held on. Madhu felt it too. The green-blue glow on his body flowed into the gold of the scale, like two rivers meeting after 18 years apart. In that instant, Mama Nuru laid her palm flat on the water, and the world exploded. Not with sound, but with light. Gold detonated outward, flooding skin, sand, distant waves. It erased every outline, then returned them as floating sparks suspended in the air. Kanu felt himself standing inside an undersea temple where gods had just lit with every untold story. Before his eyes, memory began to move. He didn't see with eyes, he felt with soul, a soul being torn apart and stitched back together. He felt Mama Nuru cradling two infants in tear-soaked arms. Felt the sea rip one child away, dragging it down into judgment. felt the other washed ashore, a painful gift from fate. Felt Medu growing among whale song and deep green glow, days without sun. Felt himself growing on land, carrying a nameless absence. Two worlds, two lives, running parallel, then twisting together like silk ribbons caught in wind. Kanu gasped as the light snapped off. He dropped to one knee, heart trying to hammer its way out of his ribs. Medu staggered, fists clenched around memories slipping through his fingers. No one spoke, but both understood. They were halves severed at birth, souls broken by a curse, children born never to meet until tonight. Mama Nuru looked at them, relief and terror braided in her gaze. She seemed to know this truth was not a gift, but a warning. The gold in her eyes wavered like water about to shatter. The wind suddenly reversed. Far out, the sea growled one long note, not the voice of ordinary waves, but the sound of a door beginning to open, a door even the ocean feared. Kanu rose, still clutching the scale. He looked at Medu, and for the first time, his fear was no longer about the stranger in front of him. It was about something far larger rising beneath their feet. A shudder ran across the face of the sea, and Kanu knew. Tonight's golden light had not only awakened memory, it had awakened what had slept for 18 years. The sea drew back like a colossal creature exhaling after an 18-year sleep, leaving wet calligraphy across the sand, the handwriting of gods. The golden light around them dissolved into the air, yet its afterwarmth lingered, like heat still clinging to cloth after a candle's kiss. The roar beneath the waves quieted into a soft, deep breathing, the lullaby of ancestors riding every swell. Kanu closed his eyes. His knees buckled as if everything he had just seen were only a dream that had outstayed real time. When he opened them again, Medu was still there, not illusion, not moonlight, but flesh and soul, the emptiness finally filled by the shape of a twin brother he had only ever felt in his bones. A gentle wind passed, carrying the familiar smell of seaweed and wet island wood, but laced with something new, the scent of the true deep, the place sunlight never reaches, where whale song calls the herd home. That scent clung to Medu's skin like proof he had lived his entire life inside the ocean's heart. They looked at each other in silence. No blinding light, no thunder of waves to hide behind. Only the raw truth of two souls that had just found the other half after a journey split by something they hadn't yet named. Mama Nuru glided forward between her sons. She did not touch them, yet her presence wrapped them in a small halo, the invisible embrace of a mother who had been kept from holding her children far too long. The gold in her eyes steadied, as though the weight she had carried for nearly 2 decades had finally loosened, even if only a little. In a voice low as water over stone, she spoke one sentence that carried the weight of the entire abyss. "It is time to heal." She did not say who should begin or how, but that single line, dropped into the stillness before the storm, became the guide for everything that would follow. In the moonlight, her hands trembled faintly, as if waving goodbye to pain, regret, or the memory of a birth night torn in two. Kanu looked down at the golden scale in his palm. It no longer blazed, yet it pulsed warm as a heartbeat. He glanced at Medu and saw the matching half-piece trembling in his brother's hand, beating the exact same rhythm. 2 fragments, 2 tremors, 2 souls mirroring each other like water and moon. But he also saw the exhaustion carved into Medu's face, exhaustion born in a place without sun, the kind only those who live between worlds truly know. Without warning, the sea changed color. Not violently, not with a roar. Simply a shift from deep indigo to soft turquoise, the ocean's apology for keeping one child too long. Waves curled in gently, touching the shore, leaving patches of golden light on the surface, like wordless letters sent to land. Far off, the wooden houses of the Gullah village glowed with night fires, lit in gratitude for surviving the storm. Wood smoke mingled with salt air, weaving the warm scent of a community that had carried one another for generations. Kanu looked toward the village, then back to Madhu. He knew whatever changed from this moment forward belonged not only to the sea, but to the land as well. What Mama Nuru had just ignited was not only memory, it was responsibility. Kanu took one step toward Madhu. Not a wary step, but the step of someone who had decided. Madhu did not retreat. The face that had been cold as pre-storm water softened, eyes reflecting recognition. When only a small space remained between them, Mama Nuru drifted back, giving room to the two children she had once been unable to keep together. Kanu lifted his hand, not to touch yet, only close enough. Madhu stared at that hand, eyes holding both worlds, and for the first time the divide was no longer a boundary, but a wound that could close. But before their fingers could meet, the sea behind Mama Nuru moved again. This time the light was neither gold nor blue, but black, black as the void, black as sealed curses. Water spiraled downward, opening a pitch-dark cleft. Mama Nuru froze. She turned, eyes suddenly flooded with terror. Terror even the ocean could not hide. Cold shot down Kanu's spine. Madhu stepped half a pace forward, warrior instinct rising. Because that black was not mere darkness, it was the return of what had taken Madhu. What had split the twins, what even the sea refused to name. So what was rising from the abyss, and had it come to reclaim one golden-scaled child, or both brothers at once? The black rose from the cleft like smoke forced into shape, neither clear nor mistakable. It was not water, not wind, not living creature. It was older than Gullah tales, older than the curse the ancestors had whispered in terror across generations. Kanu felt its cold before its form arrived, a cold that pierced skin, pierced memory. Madhu stepped in front of him, not as a warrior shielding the weak, but as instinct from a soul that had once been touched by that darkness. The green-blue glow on his body shifted to bruised violet, the ocean's warning. Above them, the sky sagged. The moon was half-veiled, its light sliding crooked across the water. Mama Nuru drew back half a pace, her golden beauty dulled by gray frost. Fear rippled from her eyes in tiny circles, making the surrounding water tremble. For the first time since appearing, she wore not the sacred gentleness of the sea, but the face of a mother who knows her children stand before something larger than any curse. The blackness rose higher, taking clearer shape. A whirlpool of pure obsidian flecked with faint, wandering lights, eyes of things that had never seen moonlight. Those eyes did not focus. They studied all three at once, deciding which child still belonged to it. Or perhaps, which child had always belonged. Wind screamed across the sand, carrying the sound of drums buried deep in the earth. Kanu heard the rhythm clearly, unsteady, off balance, the beat of a ritual performed wrong. The same rhythm that had pulsed inside the golden memory burst when two infants were torn from their mother's arms. He understood. It was not memory. It was a summons. The summons that had dragged Madhu into the sea the very first day of his life. Mama Nuru looked at her sons, wordless, but her eyes wrote whole scriptures of regret. She knew she could no more protect them from this darkness than she had kept her sea from claiming one son on the night they were born. Water around them began to spin, pulling sand upward in small cyclones. Moonlight flickered as if fear itself were shaking it. The golden scale in Kanu's hand grew warm, then hot enough to feel it might melt. Madhu clenched the matching half, and the blue-green light on his skin flared awake, as though the two fragments were speaking to each other through the souls holding them. No words were spoken, yet what happened next was answer enough. Both halves of the scale blazed at the same instant, not blinding like the night of revealed memory, but soft, as gentle as breath. Gold spilled from Kanu's palm across the water, then across the place where Madhu stood, drawing a fragile bridge of light between land and sea, human and spirit, light and dark. The blackness paused. It neither retreated nor advanced. It listened. Madhu bowed his head, hearing something from the deep that Kanu could not. Pain crossed his face, the ache of an old wound carelessly reopened. Kanu saw his brother's hand tremble, not from fear, but from memory heavier than any storm. The family had begun to heal, yet the darkness remembered. Mama Nuru moved toward the glowing fragments, letting their light fall across her face. When gold touched her eyes, gentleness returned. Her beauty revived. The water around her softened. The glow reflected on her skin like a rite of absolution, but only for a breath. The black moved again, faster, sharper, like claws remembering what they once owned. The sea beneath their feet cracked into thin fissures that dissolved into threatening spirals. Air thickened, darkened, grew heavier. Kanu instinctively stepped back. Madhu stepped forward, recognizing what was rising, not only the source of their pain, but the deepest reason the two worlds had never been allowed to merge. One final wave slammed the shore, the ocean's last warning. Because the darkness did not merely wish to appear, it wished to choose, to reclaim, to snuff the gold that had only just been rekindled. In that instant, Kanu understood. For the family to truly heal, for the curse to be fully broken forever, for light and dark to stop devouring each other, one of the brothers would have to face whatever was rising from the abyss. And so, on the moon-silvered beach of the Sea Islands, 3 souls, 1 mother, 2 sons torn apart, stood at the very edge between light and darkness. The sea held its breath. The wind carried the ancient whispers of ancestors. The golden glow around the 2 scale fragments still trembled, like a heart trying to speak what humans are not yet brave enough to hear. Kanu and Madhu did not know what was rising from that abyss. They did not know whether it carried memories of the past or demanded a new price for the future. But they knew one thing. For the first time in their lives, they were no longer standing alone. And sometimes, that alone is enough to begin the healing. This story reminds us that every one of us carries a missing piece of soul. Sometimes a memory, sometimes a loved one, sometimes the self we lost along the way. But the journey to find it always begins with the courage to face the truth, and continues with the choice to stand beside one another, no matter what separations life has drawn. If any part of this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Tell me, do you see yourself in Kanu, in Madhu, or in Mama Nuru? And if you want part 2, where the final secret beneath the sea finally rises into the light, just drop 1 line. I'm ready to step into the next chapter. Like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who might need a story that heals. Because who knows, maybe they too are carrying a golden scale inside them, waiting to be found.